The first thing Bruce Lee's students noticed was the visitor's shoes. They were too polished for training and too loud on the floor, each step clicking through the school like a challenge before the man had even spoken. He did not bow when he entered. He looked around the room, counted the students with his eyes, and smiled as if he had found an audience. It was a small school, not a theater. Wooden floor, sweat on the air, a heavy bag swinging gently from an earlier drill, notebooks stacked near the wall. The students had been practicing footwork when the door opened. Bruce had been correcting a young man's shoulder position. Then every conversation in the room slowly died. The visitor's name was Victor Kane in this story, a fictional tournament fighter with a reputation built on fast hands, hard talk, and public challenges. He was not famous enough to be respected everywhere, but he was famous enough to feel insulted when people did not know him. That kind of fame often arrives hungry. Victor carried a newspaper folded under one arm. He slapped it against his palm before speaking. "So this is the place," he said. No one answered. He looked at the students again, then at Bruce. "I heard you teach people to fight without fighting. I came to see if that means anything when a real fighter is standing in front of you." A few students stiffened. One of them, a young man named David, stepped forward half a pace before Bruce lifted one hand without looking at him. The signal was small, but everyone understood it. Do not answer ego with ego. Do not let another man's noise decide the rhythm of your room. Bruce turned toward Victor calmly. His face did not change. That bothered Victor immediately. Men who arrive to embarrass someone need a reaction, because reaction proves they have entered the other man's mind. Bruce gave him nothing to hold. No anger, no performance, no wounded pride, only attention. Victor unfolded the newspaper and pointed to an old photograph of Bruce in a demonstration. "Everyone talks about speed," he said. "Everyone talks about philosophy. But philosophy is easy when your own students are clapping for you." He raised his voice just enough for the students to feel included in the insult. The room became sharper. The students were not frightened exactly, but they were young enough to feel protective. To them, Bruce was more than a teacher. He was proof that discipline could become alive. Watching a stranger try to turn that proof into a joke felt personal, which made it dangerous. Bruce asked one question. "What do you want?" Victor smiled because he thought the question meant the door had opened. "1 minute," he said, in front of them. "I try to touch you. You do whatever you want. If I touch you 3 times, you admit this school sells stories." The students looked at Bruce. Some wanted him to refuse because the challenge was cheap. Others wanted him to accept because insult burns hotter when young people are asked to swallow it. Bruce looked at Victor, then at his students. "No," he said. Victor's smile widened, but only for a second. Bruce continued, "Not do whatever I want. That would teach them the wrong thing." Victor frowned. The answer had not been fear, and that irritated him. Bruce stepped onto the center of the floor. "You try to touch me, I will not strike you. I will only stop you from touching me." The rule changed the challenge completely. Victor had come to force Bruce into defending his reputation. Bruce had turned the moment into a lesson before the first movement began. The students felt it, even if they did not yet understand it. A teacher had just refused to let ego write the curriculum. Victor laughed too loudly. "You won't hit me?" he asked. "That makes it easier." Bruce nodded once. "Then it should be easy." The words were calm, but they took the room away from Victor. A loud man can survive an insult. It is harder to survive being given exactly what he asked for. David stood near the wall with his fist closed. Another student, Maria, whispered for him to relax. She was older than most, patient, and quick to notice when pride was about to disguise itself as loyalty. She understood before David did that Bruce was teaching them as much as he was answering Victor. Bruce removed his dark jacket and placed it on a chair. He did not stretch. He did not bounce. He did not prepare like a man entering a contest. He stood with his hands low, feet quiet beneath him, eyes soft and exact. Victor rolled his shoulders and began circling as if the floor already belonged to him. The school had no cheering crowd, but silence can be louder inside a small room. Every student heard the heavy bag creak. Every student heard Victor's breathing. Every student heard the clock on the wall click forward. There was no place for the moment to hide. Whatever happened would happen close enough to be felt. Victor attacked first with a quick slap toward Bruce's shoulder, Not a punch, not a real strike, just a fast touch meant to score and humiliate. Bruce shifted a fraction. Victor's hand passed through empty space. Before Victor could pull it back, Bruce's fingers touched his wrist lightly, almost politely. "One," Bruce said. Victor blinked. The students did not understand at first. Then Maria did. Bruce was counting the times he could have controlled the attack, not the times Victor had failed. The game had become visible from the other direction, and suddenly Victor was no longer the only man keeping score. Victor came again, faster, with a feint toward the chest and a touch attempt toward the arm. Bruce did not retreat in a straight line. He moved as if the attack had created a door beside it. Victor reached the place where Bruce had been and found only air. Bruce's palm stopped an inch from Victor's ribs. Two. This time everyone heard it. Victor's jaw tightened. The students felt their own anger beginning to change into attention. Anger wants a result. Attention wants a pattern. Bruce was feeding attention, not anger. He was pulling the room away from revenge and into observation. Victor stopped smiling. That was the first honest thing he had done since entering the school. He lowered his stance and began to move more carefully. His hands were still fast, but now speed carried worry inside it. Worry makes a fighter late because he is no longer moving to win. He is moving to repair an image. Bruce waited. That waiting was not passive. It felt like a trap, but not because Bruce had hidden anything. He had simply refused to give Victor a rhythm to attack. Some men are easy to hit because they announce their fear. Bruce's calm announced nothing, and the absence became pressure. Victor rushed with 3 touches in combination: shoulder, chest, sleeve. Bruce slipped the first, turned the second, and was behind the third before Victor understood how he had lost the line. Bruce's hand appeared beside Victor's neck, open and controlled. He did not touch the throat. He did not need to. 3. The word landed softly, but it filled the school. Victor spun away, angry now, not because he was hurt, but because the students had seen the truth before he found an excuse. He had entered to embarrass a teacher and discovered that embarrassment has a mirror. Bruce lifted his hand to pause the exchange. "Stop," he said. Victor shook his head. "We said 1 minute." Bruce answered, "No, you said 1 minute. I said this is a lesson." That sentence bothered everyone in a different way. Victor heard dismissal. The students heard responsibility. Bruce turned to the students. "What did you see?" David answered first, too quickly. "You were faster." Bruce looked at him. "That is not enough." David swallowed. He had given the answer most people would give. It was easy, flattering, and incomplete. Bruce disliked incomplete answers more than difficult ones. Maria said, "He was reaching for where you were." Bruce nodded. "Better." He turned back toward Victor. "A man who attacks your reputation usually aims at the picture of you in his mind. If you move only your body, he may still touch your pride. If you move your pride first, he has no target." Victor laughed bitterly. "Now we are back to philosophy." Bruce faced him. "You brought philosophy here before I did." The room went still again. "You did not come to test movement. You came to test whether I could be made angry in front of my students." That cut deeper than any strike. Victor's face changed because the sentence found the true target. He had not come only to touch Bruce. He had come to make Bruce choose between looking strong and being clear. Many challengers understand this instinctively. They do not attack the body first. They attack the teacher's role. Bruce stepped closer, still outside danger, still relaxed. "If I hit you because you insulted me, what do they learn?" He nodded toward the students. "They learn that my calm depends on your behavior. They learn that their teacher can be controlled by a stranger who says the right words." No one moved. Even Victor looked away for half a second. The room had expected a physical lesson and received something more uncomfortable. A physical defeat ends quickly. A moral exposure stays in the air because it asks everyone present to examine how easily they can be pulled by pride. Bruce invited Victor to continue but changed the condition. "Now try again," he said. "Not to embarrass me. Try to solve the problem." Victor frowned. The shift confused him because he had no practice separating attack from performance. He knew how to challenge a man. He did not know how to study one. Victor moved again. Slower this time, but more honest. His first touch attempt came without a smirk. Bruce allowed it closer than before, then redirected the wrist and stepped to the side. There, Bruce said. You felt the line disappear. Victor did not answer, but his eyes admitted he had. Bruce asked him to repeat the same entry. Victor did. Bruce stopped him again, then showed the students the moment before failure. Here, he said, touching Victor's shoulder lightly. This is where intention becomes visible. The hand has not moved yet, but the body has already confessed. The students leaned forward. This was the kind of teaching they rarely saw in books. Not a technique listed like a recipe, but a living moment dissected while the heat was still inside it. Victor, unwillingly, had become the best training partner in the room because his pride made every mistake bright. David asked whether Victor was telegraphing. Bruce nodded, then corrected him. But do not only look for big telegraphs. A beginner announces with the arm. A better man announces with the shoulder. A dangerous man announces with intention. If you only train your eyes, you will always be late. Victor listened, despite himself. That was the first crack in the wall he had carried through the door. The man who came to embarrass someone was now learning in front of the people he wanted as witnesses. It was not comfortable, but useful lessons often begin exactly where comfort ends. Bruce told Victor to touch his sleeve only. No face, no chest. Only sleeve. Victor nodded. The restriction gave him focus. He attacked with a sudden burst, aiming for cloth near Bruce's left arm. Bruce turned the arm into emptiness, and Victor's fingers closed on nothing. The students saw the trick now, except it was not a trick. Bruce was not merely moving away. He was making the target become false at the instant Victor believed it became reachable. That is different from speed. Speed wins a race. Timing changes the race before the other man understands he is running. Bruce repeated it 3 times. Each time Victor came closer. Each time he failed more honestly. The room's attitude shifted again. At first, the students had wanted to see Victor punished. Now they wanted to see whether he could learn. Bruce had taken an enemy and made him useful. That was one reason his teaching could feel dangerous. He did not always give people the emotional victory they wanted. A lesser teacher might have crushed Victor and let the students celebrate. Bruce was after something harder. He wanted the students to understand how easily celebration can become the same disease as mockery. Victor finally stopped and placed his hands on his knees. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. He was breathing harder than the exchange seemed to require, because pride consumes oxygen. Bruce waited until he looked up. Do you still want to embarrass me? Bruce asked. Victor almost answered with anger. Everyone saw it rise, then he swallowed it. No, he said. The word was rough but real. Bruce nodded. Good. Then now you can learn something. The students understood the cruelty of the earlier challenge had ended, not because Victor was defeated, but because the motive had changed. Bruce walked to the heavy bag and tapped it once. A bag does not insult you, he said. That is why men like training with bags. The bag gives resistance without challenging the ego. He turned back to Victor. A person gives you both. If you cannot separate them, you will always be manipulated. Maria looked at David when Bruce said that. David noticed and unclenched his fists. The lesson had reached him too. He had wanted Bruce to defend the school with force. Now he saw the trap. If the school could be made angry by every visitor, then every visitor owned a piece of it. Bruce invited David onto the floor. Show me how you would have answered him, he said. David hesitated, embarrassed. Victor watched from the side, surprised to see the attention leave him. David raised his guard and stepped forward with the kind of intensity young students often mistake for loyalty. Bruce stopped him immediately with one hand on his chest. Not hard, just enough. Too much, he said. David blinked. He insulted you. Bruce answered, he insulted an idea in your head. You volunteered your body to protect the idea before you understood what was actually threatened. David's face reddened. The correction was gentle, but public. Bruce did not enjoy embarrassing students, yet he understood that private pride sometimes needs a public mirror. He lowered his hand. Loyalty without awareness becomes a handle. Anyone can grab it and pull you. The room felt that lines settle into the floor. Victor had grabbed that handle when he entered. David had nearly offered it to him. Even some older students recognized themselves. A school can be full of good intentions and still be easy to manipulate if every intention is tied to ego. Bruce asked David to try again. this time without anger. David moved slower, watching more. Bruce let him approach, then stepped aside and touched his shoulder. "Better," he said. The word meant more to David than praise would have, because it came after correction. Praise can be cheap. Better has direction inside it. Victor stood quietly now. For the first time since entering, he looked less like a threat and more like a man who had arrived carrying the wrong tools. He had brought noise to a room built for listening. He had brought challenge to a teacher who knew how to turn challenge into structure. Bruce asked him to join the drill with David. The students reacted silently. A few still disliked him. That was honest. Respect does not appear instantly because a man stops being foolish for 1 minute. But Bruce was not asking them to admire Victor. He was asking them to train with reality. The drill was simple. Victor tried to touch David's shoulder. David had to move without anger. At first, David failed because he wanted to prove he had learned. Wanting to prove learning is another way of leaving the present. Victor touched him twice. David frowned. Bruce said nothing. On the third attempt, David breathed out and stopped performing. Victor reached, and David shifted just enough. The touch missed. The room did not cheer. Bruce would not have liked that. Instead, the students watched the small correction happen. Quiet improvement deserves quiet respect. Victor looked at David and gave him a nod. It was small, but it changed the air between them. A few minutes earlier, Victor had wanted to use the students as witnesses against their teacher. Now one student had learned something through him. That fact was harder for Victor to process than failure. Bruce brought everyone back into a circle. "A man can attack your body," he said. "A man can attack your name. A man can attack the image your students have of you. If you confuse those three attacks, you will answer the wrong one." He pointed to Victor, then to David, then to himself. "All three of us were tested." The students looked surprised. Bruce continued. "He was tested by pride. David was tested by loyalty. I was tested by anger. If only one man learns, the room wastes the lesson." That sentence removed the last bit of spectacle from the challenge. The students could no longer remember it only as the day a rude fighter failed to touch Bruce. They had to remember their own part in the room. That made the story less comfortable, but far more useful. Victor asked a question then, and it came out quieter than anything he had said before. "Could you have hit me?" The room did not like the question, because everyone already knew the answer and still wanted to hear it. Bruce looked at him for a moment. "Many times," Bruce said. No boast, no smile, just fact. Victor nodded, absorbing both the answer and the mercy inside it. To be spared without being mocked can be more humbling than being struck. A strike lets pride blame pain. Mercy leaves pride alone with itself. Bruce demonstrated where the strikes had been. A palm near the ribs, a finger near the throat, a low kick that never left the ground. A shoulder stop that could have become a takedown. Each point appeared briefly, like lightning behind a curtain. The students saw how much violence had been withheld. Maria asked why he had shown it afterward. Bruce answered, "Because mercy without clarity can look like weakness. Clarity without mercy can become cruelty. A teacher must know when the student needs to see both." Victor did not like being called a student, but he did not object. The school returned to training, but the energy was different. Victor stayed, watching from the side. That was unexpected. Men who fail publicly often leave quickly to protect the story they will tell about themselves later. Victor did not leave. He watched David repeat the shoulder drill again and again. Bruce noticed but did not comment. He had already given Victor enough attention. Sometimes the best way to help a proud man learn is to stop making him the center of the room. Without an audience to fight, pride loses some of its oxygen. After several minutes, Victor asked if he could try the drill properly. David looked at Bruce. Bruce nodded. The two men faced each other again, but the feeling had changed. Earlier, they represented insult and defense. Now they represented two students trying not to lie with their bodies. Victor reached. David moved. Victor missed. This time, Victor did not curse or laugh. He reset. Repetition stripped drama from the moment and revealed the work underneath. That is what training does when it is honest. It turns stories into practice, and practice into something a person can actually use. Bruce walked between them and corrected Victor's shoulder. "You are still trying to win the room," he said. Victor looked around, surprised. Even now? Bruce nodded. Especially now. Once pride loses loudly, it often tries to recover quietly. Victor looked down. The correction found him again. There are people who can survive being called weak, but cannot survive being seen accurately. Bruce's accuracy had become the real opponent. Victor had prepared to fight hands and feet. He had not prepared to meet a man who could read motive. The drill continued. David improved. Victor improved. The students improved by watching both. No one forgot the insult, but the insult no longer owned the room. It had been converted into training material, which is one of the highest forms of victory inside a real school. Near the end, Bruce asked Victor to attack one last time, freely. Victor hesitated. Victor, to touch you, he asked. Bruce said, to understand what happens when you try. That answer removed the last audience from the challenge. Victor nodded and moved with the most honesty he had shown all day. He came fast, but not wild. Bruce slipped inside, stopped him at the elbow, controlled the shoulder, and placed 2 fingers lightly against his chest. The movement ended before anyone had fully followed it. Victor froze, not because he was trapped brutally, but because he finally understood how early the ending had arrived. Bruce released him. That is enough, he said. Victor stepped back and bowed. It was not a beautiful bow. It was stiff, uncertain, and late, but it was real. The students watched without mockery. They had been trained better than to laugh at the first honest movement a man makes after pride. Victor picked up his newspaper from the floor. Earlier, it had been a weapon, a prop for humiliation. Now it looked childish in his hand. He folded it carefully and said, I came here wrong. Bruce answered, then leave better. No long speech, no forgiveness ceremony, just a direction. At the door, Victor paused. Why did you let me stay? He asked. Bruce looked around the school before answering. Because my students needed to see what happens after a challenge ends. Victor waited. Bruce added, if they only see victory, they may spend their lives chasing applause. That was the hidden center of the day. The challenge had never been about whether Bruce could avoid a touch. It had been about what his students would learn from the way he handled disrespect. A teacher's victory can become a student's poison if the lesson is only domination. After Victor left, nobody spoke for a while. The school felt larger, though the walls had not moved. David looked at his own hands. Maria rolled her shoulders and returned to footwork. The heavy bag swung slightly in the corner, still carrying the rhythm from earlier training, as if nothing dramatic had happened. Bruce gathered the students. Remember this, he said. Do not let another person choose the version of you that enters the room. That sentence stayed with them. It was not only martial advice, it was a way of living around insult, praise, pressure, and the constant temptation to perform strength. David asked if there is ever a time to answer disrespect with force. Bruce did not pretend the answer was simple. Yep, he said, but only when force is the answer to the problem, not the answer to your feelings. Many men confuse the two and call it honor. The students were quiet because they had all felt that confusion. Honor can be a clean word for dirty impulses if a man is not careful. Loyalty can hide anger. Courage can hide vanity. Discipline is the practice of separating those things before the body moves. Bruce resumed class. No dramatic music, no final pose, no speech for history. He made them repeat the shoulder drill until the room grew tired of it, then made them repeat it again. That was his way of sealing a lesson, not with emotion, with repetition. The story would have been easier to tell if it ended with a knockout. Knockouts make clean endings. A man falls, the room gasps, the legend grows. But this ending was more useful. A rude fighter entered to embarrass Bruce Lee and left having trained. That is a harder victory to understand and a better one to remember, because the real opponent was never Victor alone. The real opponent was the hunger in the room to see him destroyed. The students had that hunger. Victor had it. Even the audience inside our imagination has it. We like justice to look like damage. Bruce showed another form. Justice in that school looked like control. It looked like refusing to become the thing that insult expected. It looked like protecting students from the wrong lesson. It looked like mercy sharp enough to be understood and clarity calm enough not to become cruelty. That is why this story belongs to the larger meaning of Bruce Lee's legacy, even as it stands alone. Not because it connects to another night, another opponent, or another room, but because it reveals the same inner principle from a different angle. The setting changes, the test changes, the lesson remains alive. Bruce was dangerous because he could strike, but he was memorable because he could choose not to strike when striking would have made him look powerful for the wrong reason. That choice is harder than speed. Speed requires training. Restraint requires training, plus honesty. Victor learned that in front of the very students he hoped to use as witnesses. He wanted them to witness Bruce's embarrassment. Instead, they witnessed the anatomy of ego. They saw how it enters a room, how it demands attention, how it panics when attention turns into truth. David learned something too. He learned that defending a teacher can become disobeying the teacher if the defense comes from anger. Maria learned that patience can protect a room better than a clenched fist. The school learned that every visitor brings more than technique through the door. He brings a test of atmosphere. That is a serious lesson for any training space. A school is not defined only by what it practices when things are calm. It is defined by what it becomes when disrespected. Some schools become mobs. Some become theaters. A real school should become clearer. Bruce wanted clarity. He wanted students who could see before reacting, breathe before defending, and understand before labeling a movement as courage. He knew that a man who cannot control himself in a room cannot express himself honestly in a fight. The challenge ended, but the phrase stayed. Do not let another person choose the version of you that enters the room. For a fighter, that means not letting taunts choose your timing. For a teacher, it means not letting spectators choose your lesson. For any person, it means guarding the doorway of the self. Victor probably told the story differently later. Proud men often edit memory to survive it. Maybe he said Bruce was clever. Maybe he said the room was too small. Maybe he said he had not been serious. But the body remembers what pride edits. His body knew the truth. The students remembered too, and their version mattered more. They remembered shoes clicking on the floor. They remembered the newspaper slapped against a palm. They remembered wanting revenge. They remembered Bruce saying no, then changing the meaning of the challenge before accepting it. They remembered that he did not need to hit Victor to own the room. Ownership is the wrong word maybe, but it is the one people feel. The room's rhythm belonged to Bruce because he refused to let Victor set it. Control of rhythm is often control of outcome. That truth reaches beyond martial arts. Many people lose before conflict begins because they accept the emotional rhythm handed to them by an opponent. Anger says, move now. Pride says, prove it now. Fear says, protect the image now. Discipline says, see first. Bruce saw first. That is what the students witnessed. Not simply speed of hand or foot, but speed of perception. He saw Victor's motive. He saw David's anger. He saw the room's hunger. He saw the lesson hidden inside the insult and pulled it out before anyone else knew it was there. That is why there was no empty victory. Nothing in the room was wasted. The insult became material. The challenge became structure. The challenger became a partner. The students became witnesses to their own impulses. A lesser teacher would have ended the moment in 10 seconds. Bruce made it teach for a lifetime. When people talk about Bruce Lee, they often talk about what he could do to another man. But stories like this ask a different question. What could he prevent himself from doing? What anger could he refuse? What easy applause could he walk past? What lesson could he protect from becoming a show? The answer is the legacy. Not perfection, not sainthood, not a man without fire. He had fire. Everyone in the school felt it beneath the calm. But fire under discipline becomes light. Fire without discipline becomes smoke. Victor brought smoke. Bruce kept the room lit. So the day did not end with students chanting his name. It ended with footwork, shoulder drills, quiet breathing, a newspaper folded uselessly outside the door, a visitor walking away slower than he had entered, and a teacher returning the room to practice as if practice had always been the point. That is the strongest ending because it is the truest kind of victory for a teacher. The room was not left addicted to spectacle. It was left more honest. The students did not learn that their teacher could embarrass a man. They learned that a man trying to embarrass their teacher could still become part of the lesson. If you remember only the failed touches, you miss the story. Remember the refusal. Remember the pause. Remember the way Bruce changed the rules so the lesson would not be poisoned by pride. Remember that he counted control instead of contact, opportunity instead of damage, understanding instead of applause. That is why the fighter failed. Not because he was slow and not because he lacked courage. He failed because he entered the school with the wrong question. He asked, "Can I embarrass this man in front of his students?" Bruce answered the question underneath it. Who controls you when your pride is touched? By the end, Victor had an answer he did not expect. David had one too. Maybe every student did. The school had been tested and did not become a theater. The teacher had been insulted and did not become a performer. The challenger had failed and was still allowed to learn. That is a separate story, complete in itself. A door opens, polished shoes click, a newspaper becomes a weapon. A challenge tries to poison a room, and Bruce Lee turns the poison into training. No crowd needed, no trophy needed, no knockout needed. Just control so deep it changes what victory means. And in the quiet after class, when the students swept the floor and the heavy bag finally stopped moving, the school held a different kind of silence. Not the silence after fear, not the silence after humiliation. The silence after a hard lesson lands exactly where it should. That silence said more than applause ever could. It said the room had seen a man try to embarrass Bruce Lee in front of his students, and it had seen Bruce refuse to make embarrassment the language of the lesson. The fighter came for spectacle. He left behind discipline. The next morning, the students did not train as if they had watched a show. They trained as if they had been warned. Every reach, every breath, every spark of anger had become information. That was Bruce Lee's real victory in the story. He did not merely defend his school. He taught the school how not to be captured by insult. Later that evening, David stayed after class. He asked Bruce whether he had failed by wanting to defend him. Bruce did not answer too quickly. He made David sweep the floor first. The answer came only after the room was quiet enough to receive it. "You failed only when you stopped seeing clearly," Bruce said. David held the broom still. That answer bothered him because it was fair. Bruce continued, "Protecting something valuable is not wrong, but if anger chooses your movement, then anger becomes your teacher. And anger is a poor teacher because it only knows how to repeat itself louder." Maria listened from the doorway while wrapping the notebooks with a rubber band. She had seen the whole lesson from another angle. She had not wanted Victor punished as badly as David had, but she had wanted him corrected. Now she understood that correction could be harder, cleaner, and more useful than punishment. Bruce asked them both to remember the first sound of the day, the shoes. "The challenge began before the word," he said. "The way a man enters can already ask you to become someone. Your job is to notice the invitation and decide whether it deserves an answer." That line stayed with Maria. Years later, she would remember it whenever a room tried to pull her into its mood. Some rooms ask you to become loud. Some ask you to become afraid. Some ask you to become cruel. Bruce had taught them that discipline begins before movement, before speech, before the first visible attack. Victor's newspaper remained in the trash near the door. No one had thrown it there dramatically. It simply lost its purpose. At the beginning, it was a prop meant to create embarrassment. By the end, it was paper again. That was another quiet victory. The object of insult had become meaningless. Bruce picked it up, unfolded it once, and looked at the photograph. He did not look proud. He looked almost detached, as if the printed image belonged to someone else. Then he folded it carefully and placed it back down. "Never let your picture replace your practice," he said. The students understood the warning. Reputation can become a second body, and many people spend their lives protecting that body while the real one grows weak. Victor had attacked the reputation. Bruce had protected the practice. That was why he remained free while Victor arrived already trapped. Before they left, Bruce made David and Maria repeat the sleeve drill together. No anger, no audience, no visitor, no newspaper. Just one student reaching and another moving. The drill looked ordinary again, which meant the lesson had returned to where it belonged. Not in drama, but in training. That is the part people often miss about great teachers. They do not only create memorable moments, They return memorable moments back into work. Without that return, a lesson becomes entertainment. With it, the lesson enters the body. Bruce knew that the body remembers what the ego only quotes. So this story should not be remembered as a man walking in and failing to touch Bruce Lee. That is only the surface. Remember it as the day a school was offered an easy emotional victory, and its teacher refused to buy it. He chose clarity over spectacle and made everyone pay attention to themselves. The final image is not Victor leaving, and it is not Bruce standing undefeated. The final image is the class returning to practice, feet sliding on wood, breath settling, a heavy bag barely moving in the corner, a newspaper gone quiet, and students who now understood that insult is only powerful when you hand it the handle. That was Bruce Lee's answer in this separate story. Not anger, not revenge, not a performance for loyal students. Control, awareness, mercy with teeth, discipline strong enough to turn a rude challenge into training. The fighter came to embarrass him in front of his students. Bruce made the students harder to embarrass forever.